I see in the comments, people are joining from all over the world. This is fantastic, a truly global audience. We have about 1,900 people, almost 2,000 people signed up today for this conversation. Welcome to MIT and to our LinkedIn Live events. And as the name confers, this is live, although the recording will be posted out in the following days for everybody to review. My name is Mike Kavanagh. I'm an Associate Program Director at MIT Sloan. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Elsbeth Johnson today for our program on delivering strategic change. A quick intro for Elsbeth. She is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan and is an expert on leadership, strategy, and change. And the main focus of Elsbeth's research is what leaders need to do to help their organizations execute on strategy and deliver long-term strategic change. When she is not in London, she spends several weeks every spring and summer at MIT on campus, and we are delighted to welcome her back next year for two programs that she teaches at Exec Ed, our month-long advanced management program, and a brand new program that we are thrilled to be offering, Leading Strategic Change, how to really deliver the shift your organization needs. That course will be running on campus next June, the week of June 5th through 9th. And we will be talking about that in this next hour. But prior to academia, a bit more about Elsbeth. She has worked as an investment banker, an equity analyst, and as well a corporate strategist, spending a lot of her early career years in Hong Kong. Yeah. And as a consultant and an executive educator, Elsbeth works with a range of companies, tons of executives on how to deliver the strategy, the capabilities, and the culture that will help deliver that. And out of that work has come her research and her book, Step Up, Step Back, which we will also be talking about today. But today's conversation really is, every organization has a strategic change effort, or they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
And almost all of them can fail, or they're harder to execute.
Right.
And we need to ask ourselves, why is that? And what can leaders do to increase the chance that their change effort will be successful? So enough of me, and welcome Elsbeth from London.
Thank you so much, Mike. A pleasure always to be in a conversation with you, and really looking forward to having a conversation with all of the folks who are in this LinkedIn Live event today.
Perfect.
So the place I was going to start with this is one of the questions that I get asked a lot, particularly when I first launched the book, which it's now almost 3 years old, is why did the world need another book on leading strategic change? This is not a greenfield site. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I guess I would say two things to that. One, an awful lot of leaders were failing to deliver the change or execute their new strategy in the way they wanted. And by that, I mean that there was nothing really wrong with the strategy, but it just wasn't getting executed, or the execution was just harder. It was just harder and more grindy, and it took longer than leaders were hoping. So that kind of told us that maybe the existing research and the existing advice that we were giving to leaders maybe wasn't doing the job it needed to do for those leaders and their organizations. And then the other question I get asked a lot is, how is it different? Basically, why is this more helpful advice for leaders? And I guess the reason for that, the very short answer to that question is, we asked different people different questions over a different time frame. So let me unpack those three little bits. So we asked different people. A lot of the existing research really focused on just talking to leaders about what they did, and even within that leadership cadre, a very narrow cadre, very often just talking to CEOs about what they did to lead a change. Now, as everyone on this call will know, a CEO's view I mean, nothing wrong with it, but it's their view. It's partial at best. And so what we did was first of all in my PhD research and then in follow-up research, we went out and we asked not just the CEO or the C-suite, but also the people tasked with leading the change, the people who are actually, whose KPIs and job descriptions were, get this done. We asked them what their leaders did, how it was perceived, and really what they needed from leaders in order to make the change easier and faster for them, the people tasked with delivering it. So that's the first thing, different people. We asked them different questions. An awful lot of the existing research was basically saying to, again, leaders only, what did you do? What did you say? Focused on very much leadership activities. Whereas we asked them lots of questions, as well as those things, about how did you change the KPIs? How did you, reorg the organization to make it fit for the purpose of the change? How did you think about budgets and reallocation of people? So a lot of the questions were deliberately about structural issues, whether that's KPIs and org charts, or softer structural issues like habits and activities and routines. And that's because my background as an academic, one of the theoretical lenses I use is something that we refer to as structuration theory, which is a very fancy term for basically saying we believe that organizations or anything that involves people is made up of human effort, agency, but also structure. And structure really matters. And actually, if you look at a lot of the existing research, it doesn't have enough focus on the structure and the structural changes that leaders made, too much on the kind of agency of the leadership effort rather than the structure. So that was the second part. We asked some different questions. And then the third part, and goodness, this is important, is that we asked those questions over the different time period, specifically the full duration of the change. The amazing thing about the existing research when I came to look at it is an awful lot of it looked at only essentially the first 3 to 6 months of a change. And as all of us on the call will recognize, that's basically the first 100 meters of what is a marathon. Most change, strategic change, worthy of the name, takes between 3 to 5 years to execute. So if you're only studying the first 3 to 6 months of that change, you're just missing a ton of data on what does it really take to sustain that change rather than just, kick it off in a really successful way. So I think those three things, we asked different people, different questions over a different period of time. I think that meant that we just unearthed a different and sometimes slightly counterintuitive story about what it takes from leaders to enable their people to deliver the change that those leaders have asked for.
And in what ways do you think this research, your research, is really helping leaders and the people underneath them?
Well, I guess what it does is it says, the reason the book is called Step Up, Step Back is because the headline advice to leaders is that they need to step up and do more than they typically do, albeit in specific ways and at specific times in the very early stages of the change. And then they need to, and indeed should, step back and do less than they typically do in the change's later stages. Now, again, they need to do specific things and at specific times, but basically they need to step back and let other people come into the role of deciding what to do and deciding how to do it. And that's where we see real empowerment happen at different levels lower down the organization. So I think the first way that it adds value to leaders is it specifies the work they need to do in the step up stage. And then it specifies the work they need to do in the step back stage. And I think that just having real clarity about, well, what is it I need to be doing and when, I think is very, very helpful. The second thing I think it says to leaders is, to be blunt, this is on you. If you're complaining that your organization is not delivering, or you're complaining that people 1 or 2 levels below you are still coming to you for help or input or cover. Very often it's about political cover.
Mhm.
I think I know what you want, but before I actually go out on a limb and incur personal risk in making that decision myself, I'm just going to check in with you, my boss or my boss's boss. If you're complaining about any of those features, then you have contributed to that situation as a leader. And so, the nature of the work that leaders need to do is what sets up true autonomy, true empowerment all the way down their organization. So I think those are the two ways in which it and certainly in the application of the model and the framework, which is how I spend a lot of my non-MIT time with my clients, using the framework. That's where I see it add most value to leaders and C-suites.
And the framework itself, as I read the book, there are 4 critical steps involved in delivering the strategic change and sustained performance improvement. Can you walk us through, what those are?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, 4 critical stages that leaders need to go through, 4 asks of leaders, if you like. The first 2 relate to the stepping up phase. The second 2 relate to the stepping back phase. Now, the stepping up phase is basically the first 12 months of the change. But actually, there's these 2 elements you've got to get right at the start. The first is clarity. You've got to be really clear about why you're doing the change and why now. What will it deliver and by when? And in an ideal world, that is an outcome that exists on the face of your P&L. So by that, I mean, it's an improvement in market share, or it's an improvement in margin from X to Y. It's not just an improvement in an input, such as, for example, customer satisfaction, or we're trying to change the culture. You need to articulate the why in a way that is linked to the outcome. Because if those things become dislocated, then very often what happens is, particularly in times of cost pressure, a lot of my clients are going through headcount reductions. Then those nice to haves, like culture change for its own sake, they'll get deprioritized by the CFO who's cutting cost. What you need to see is the causal link between why you're trying to do something and how it will impact and improve the P&L. So that's really what you need to get super clear about. And you'll notice that the clarity there does exist at that outcome level. It doesn't say, oh, well, that means we need to work on these 16 activities or work streams or projects. Leaders, C-suites, maybe one level below, their job is to articulate the outcomes and frankly, leave it to people who are lower down the organization, closer to the market, closer to the customer, closer to the guts of the operations of the business to decide what should be worked on. So that's really the clarity test. If people lower down the business, closer to the market, closer to the operations, can say, okay, so Mike wants an improvement in margin from X to Y in this part, this P&L. Maybe it's a country or a business unit or a product line. Maybe it's an entire enterprise. Because he wants that, it makes sense for us to work on this. It makes sense for us to focus on this segment of customers or to launch that product 6 months early. Or to, we're going to have to really work on our data. We're going to have to dedupe our customer data and improve our system integration. Very often in my experience, people further down the organization are the ones who've really got a handle on how to prioritize the work but they can only do that once they know the outcomes that leaders are asking for. So that's the very first thing. And you've got to do that right at the start. You are not ready to go. You're not ready to launch anything until you are crystal clear about why you're doing the change and why now, and what outcomes will it deliver and by when. And honestly, a lot of my time is spent with my clients, CEOs, C-suites, stopping them launching too soon because they don't have sufficient clarity on those on the answers to those questions. They can't express it in terms of the P&L. And if you can't do that, then you're not ready to go. So that's the first thing. And honestly, that's basically the work prior to launch. And then there's various other elements of clarity that you've got to get right in the first couple of months of the change. Once you've been really clear, then you can work to align the business around the change that you've asked for. So the second stepping up bit of work that you need to do is the work of alignment, the work of aligning the business around the change that you've asked for. And that's actually quite easy to do once you've been super clear. It's absolutely impossible to do if you haven't been clear. So if you start reorging without clarity, if you start reallocating budgets and people without clarity, I mean, really, when you think about it, how are you even to start realigning the business until you've got clarity? And yet, a lot of my clients have, at least in the past, said, I think what we need here is a reorg. Really? Why? What outcome are you trying to deliver? Because until you have clarity on that question, you don't know how you ought to reorg. So once you've got clarity, you can then align because you know what to talk about, you know the actions you need to take, you understand how to reallocate resources, both people and budget, and you also know what you should be measuring. So alignment by metrics. Those are the kind of the main ways of aligning the business around the change you've asked for. So clarity and alignment are the two stepping up activities that leaders need to do. And as I say, that's going to take the best part of 9 to 12 months. I mean, particularly in large, complex organizations, there's a lot of stuff to do to reorg, and there's a lot of stuff to do and conversations to have in order to reallocate budget, or people. And then once that work has been done, you can then see how the organization is responding. How quickly is the work getting scoped? How quickly are new metrics getting defined and baselined and measured for the first time? And once you've got some kind of dashboard data around progress and monitoring against milestones, that is going to also give you some feedback. Like, this is not a kind of set it in stone in the first 12 months and then just leave it alone. Because the only thing we know about any strategy is it won't play out the way you think it's going to play out. So you need to be building in feedback loops, learning loops, so that you can be just tweaking this change as it goes along. But what you're not tweaking, what you're not changing is the ask. So this is about actually now from year 2 onwards. If year 1 was about clarity and alignment, year 2 onwards is about delivering 2 other things. And the first of those is focus. And focus means that you as the leadership team, you give it the time it needs. Long-term change, clues in the name, is a long-term business. And so you can't be expecting that turning the oil tank around is going to get done in 12, 18, even 24 months. It's just going to be a longer-term business. It also might require longer-term investment. J-curves that take a while before they come back over the x-axis and actually deliver an ROI. So that's the first thing that leaders are doing from year 2 onwards, is giving the change focus and the time it needs. Focus, by the way, also means that you're giving the people working on the change the time they need to actually get it done. So rather than expecting them to do this strategic change effort in addition to their day job off the side of the desk, as it were, you've got dedicated resource. You've got people who've got enough time and slack in their day to be learning and thinking about and reflecting on the success of the change, rather than just pedal to the metal to get it done. So the third ask and the first of the 2 stepping back asks of leaders is to give the change the focus it needs. And then the fourth and final ask, and absolutely critical to the stepping back effort, is that leaders make sure that they are consistent about the change. And that means that they don't change their mind about it, but they also are consistent in how they are messaging the change. And in a very boring way, that means using the same words, the same expressions, that clarifying and reclarifying and explaining and evangelizing for the change way after the first year is done. I sometimes think it's extraordinary that I get paid to give leaders this advice, but one of the things I very often say to leaders as they're going into this second year is this is the time it's going to get really boring for you. It's going to get really boring for you. It's not going to get boring for your organization. They're off doing really interesting work. They're the ones doing the work streams or coming up with new product lines and running learning loops. It's actually going to get accelerating and pacey and interesting for them. But you are going to be bored because you're going to be saying the same thing, using the same words until your inner voice is saying, wow, haven't people got it by now? And the truth is, somebody somewhere in the organization still hasn't, or they need to hear it again in the same way. And so making leaders disciplined enough, actually in the way that the most effective politicians are disciplined about message and not changing their mind, that is one of my biggest challenges. Now, let me just say, when I say you're not allowed to change your mind, I mean, obviously you're still paying attention to what's going on outside the window. Like you say at time zero, you decided that this new strategy was the way that your business was going to get turned around, or you're going to increase margin. Stuff can happen. Say you're 18 months in, you still need to be, as I say, looking outside the window to see what your customers are doing. Have customer preferences changed? Has the price point changed? How have your competitors responded? How has the regulator responded, depending on which sector you're in? You need to be paying attention to all of your stakeholders and the market and the context and saying, is this strategy still the right one? But assuming it is the right one, you need to stick with it. What Peters and Waterman referred to as sticking to the knitting. They were right like 40 years ago. You need to stick with it, understanding that it's going to take time to get delivered. And this is where the interplay between focus and consistency becomes very important. Sticking to the knitting and being consistent is what enables you to focus. Because if you're not consistent, then you're diffused in your focus. But equally, if you're not focused, you can't really, it's much harder to remain consistent because you're trying to do all of these things. And so one of the critical ways that you bolster both the focus that the business has and the consistency that leaders are giving the business and the discipline around that is by making sure that leaders do not add in, well, what they call additional priorities. And as I say in the book, additional priorities, I mean, it's an oxymoron. It's either additional, in which case it is going to reduce the priority of the prior strategy, or it's actually a different strategy, in which case making that decision to pivot and have a different strategy, if you think that's what's required because the market context has changed, that is entirely legitimate. But guess what? At that point, if you or the business or your customers are saying, I think you need another strategy, you then need to go back and redo clarity and alignment, because it's now a new strategy that you're asking for as a leadership team. And I know an awful lot of leaders who attempt kind of surreptitiously to have a new strategy without kind of, like officially pivoting. And actually it's much better just to be really candid and say, you know what, the market's changed, or our customer preferences have moved, or the cost of regulation has gone up. So you know what, we need a different strategy, a new strategy. At which point you need to go back and be clear about what that strategy will deliver, and then realign the business around that new strategy that you've now asked for. So clarity and alignment, first two, then focus and consistency. Step up, clarity and alignment, step back, focus, and be consistent.
Terrific. So Elsbeth, you have been in the trenches with tons of organizations and leaders, C-suite. What do you think is the biggest pitfall that you have seen people experience? And how do you help them manage those pitfalls?
So I think there's two. I think the first one, and I've referred to this already, I think the first one unquestionably is, I call it in the book, the activity bias, but it's, oh my God, we've got to get some stuff done. I have one client who calls it feeding the beast. So the beast, whether that's shareholders, so institutional investors, or board members, or just C-suite who just want to be seen to be getting stuff done. The need to feed the beast is high in most organizations. And the first biggest pitfall is that they don't take the time and effort required to get that clarity that we talked about, that is so essential right at the start of the change. In fact, before you even launch. And just to remind us what the constituent parts of clarity. Why are we doing this and why now? What's the narrative that explains the imperative for change? And then what will this change deliver and by when? And in an ideal world, that is a P&L level outcome. So it lives on the face of the P&L as either an increase in market share or an increase in margin. One of the ways that I need to spend a lot of time with leaders is getting them to not launch the change prematurely before they've got real clarity on that. So I think that's pitfall number one. And as I say, that's right at the start of the change, almost before the change even happens. I think pitfall number two is leaders are insufficiently patient. They want, it's almost the activity bias played out over time. Not only do they want to start as soon as possible and get some scores on the doors, but they also really want it to just get done really quickly. And the reality of a lot of change is it's complex, it's systemic, and it requires not only investment, but it doesn't work brilliantly the first time. You need to redo it. And so we really are talking about an endeavor that's going to last years, not months. And in fact, if you think you can do your change in months, then honestly, you probably don't need something as involved as a step up, step back framework. You can just be getting on with it. It probably doesn't really qualify as strategic change at all. It's probably more like incremental change, a product tweak or a adjacent market entry. That's probably not really the kind of big strategic change that we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is changing what the business does or the way in which it does it. And the nature of that work is it's going to take time.
So what we'd like to do is take questions from our audience, and we've been gathering some that have already come in. But at this point now, we would just like to invite everybody in comments to, if you have a question or a comment for Elsbeth, to put that in and share the context of perhaps your industry, or if you have a change initiative in mind, something that you're working on.
What's your challenge? Yeah.
That really could be helpful. But so you talk about the commitment and the time. And so one of the first questions that I'm seeing is like, well, how much effort does it take as a leader to put this into practice? Is it as simple as reading the book and applying the principles? You're going to love this part. Or do you recommend hiring a consultant?
Oh yeah, you should definitely hire me. Look, I think reading the book is a really good place to start. I mean, so reading the book or coming on the 4.5 day program that we're running at MIT, I think it would be a terrific way to start, particularly on the program, because what we ask participants to this program to do is bring a change that they are tasked with leading and delivering. And what we give everyone on the program every day is the chance to capture the insights, the learning from myself and other faculty, and apply it to your particular change. So you leave with a plan that is worked through, that says, here's what I need for clarity. Here's what I need for alignment. Here's what I'm going to have to do for focus and consistency when I get there. And also to really think about what's going to get in your way, both individually and organizationally, in terms of delivering those 4 leadership asks. So yeah, I think read the book is a great place to start. Coming on the course is probably even better. I would absolutely not suggest hiring a consultant, unless it's me, obviously. But in all seriousness, the reason I say that is an awful lot of consultancies are, well, first of all, their pricing and business model is predicated on ongoing need. So it's a bit like the diet industry isn't really incentivized for diet food to really make people like sustainably thin, because they don't want to build in redundancy. And a lot of consultancies are almost priced and designed to to build dependency on them rather than build capability in their client's organization. So I think I think what this requires is for you to build change and leadership capability in your orgs. And for me, you do that by educating yourself. So yeah, reading the book, coming on the course, rather than hiring a change consultant would be my advice.
That's one of the things that excites me the most about this new course, is that, yes, there is this great framework that underlies everything, but executives leaving the course are going to come out of this with a real actionable plan.
Yeah, with a plan.
Which, of course, is hardwired into everything that we do at Sloan.
Yeah, it's kind of MIT, mens et manus, hand and mind together. I've learned some stuff, and here's how I'm going to put it into practice. It is absolutely the school's philosophy, but something that is really true, specifically true on this program. Yeah.
Another question that's coming in, are there gender dimensions to leading the changes that you have observed?
So I guess the first sentence out of my mouth on that will be, honestly, I don't have enough data from female leaders of very large organizations, because there just aren't that many of them. And the vast majority of my clients, maybe this is something about the sectors that I particularly specialize in, but I do a lot of work with financial services. I do a lot of work with insurers and reinsurers. I do a lot of work with tech, and I do a lot of work with pharma and kind of, high-end knowledge work. So professional services firms, with literally at the moment one exception, they are all led by men. So the academic answer is, I'm not sure we have enough data to have an intelligent, empirically informed answer on gender differences. The one thing I would say, though, is one of the attributes of leaders that absolutely gets in the way of the step up, step back framework is when a leader has too high an ego, and they rely too much on their personal charisma. Now, charisma as a construct has been around for many years. I mean, initially kind of, talked about in the 1920s and 30s, and created as a construct. And a construct in academia just means something that's capable of being measured and therefore operationalized in the 50s. Now, at that point, all of the data that we had on charisma was from male leaders. And so charisma is inherently a gendered construct in that respect, one that we would probably need to reconstruct in order to be a little bit less gendered. So, for example, our definition, the kind of leadership that we respond to, both as men and women, because society is gendered, is, and this for all the short women on the call will be depressing, but it's basically tall men. Yes, it really is correlated with height, getting up and basically being charismatic rock stars who then, kind of just leave the stage and everyone goes, oh my God, he's amazing. And that, what I call in the book, the Hollywood version of leading change, that has become quite encoded in all of us, actually. Whereas actually what Step Up, Step Back says is, yeah, that charismatic stuff, it's actually really useful and it's absolutely got its place, but it might be useful, but it is not sufficient. You need a ton of boring, nerdy, zero glam work. Again, these are all terms that my informants used in the research, rather than just the rock star leadership that I think we've all almost become a little bit addicted to. So you need rock star leaders who also understand and honor the importance of the nerdy backroom zero glam work, whether it's on systems or capability building or culture change, all of which is the stuff that actually delivers real change rather than just cosmetic change. So I suppose as a very long answer to a question which is probably, the answer is probably is almost certainly yes, probably. But actually what I would say to both men and women is, don't get fooled into thinking either that charisma isn't helpful. It is. Find some charisma, use it. But also don't get fooled into thinking that charisma is all you need.
There's kind of been a theme, and you touched on egos earlier.
Ah.
But I'm seeing a theme kind of emerge here about managing executive egos. And perhaps you could share a little bit of experience
Well,
on that.
so it is very, very important in the step up, step back framework, because essentially what you're doing, one of the really important byproducts of adhering to the step up, step back framework is not just that you get your change successfully delivered in a way that sticks, although that absolutely is a result. It is also that you build a new generation of leaders in your organization who have capability, who are able to step up and get promoted faster, who are able to be leaders themselves. In other words, take your job. So without question, if you have a need to put your ego on display, if you need to be the smartest person in the room who's always bringing their content and, you know, saying, well, I've got the answer to that question, then you will constrain your own ability to build capability in others, because they need to be bringing their content. They need to be answering the question, not you. You need to be hearing their voice in the room. And if you're always the person whose voice is being heard, then you crowd others out. And so without question, and I kind of knew this in the research, but without question, I've seen it play out in the application of the research. If I've got a leader who I think, you know what, I think you've got a big ego, I know that they are going to, at some point, struggle more than others with this framework. So the question then is, how do you persuade them to set aside their own ego? Now, I have to say, the vast majority of people can be persuaded because they do believe in their organizations. Most of them are most even egotistical leaders are actually quite nice people. They do, you know, if you frame it as you are stopping other people learning and stepping into senior roles and replacing you and being on your succession plan, most people will go, oh my goodness, that's awful. I didn't realize that. Okay, I will rein myself in. Now, of course, just making the decision to rein yourself in and then actually being able to do that, two very different things. So very often they will need coaching help, ongoing advice. That's a role that sometimes I play, sometimes others play. But yes, as they rebuild different habits and speak less and provide less content, what we know is that actually they free up their own time and brains to lead more. In the book, we call it the split between green zone work, which is this kind of strategic, higher level stuff, and blue zone work. And so, yeah, ego is important, but I guess the real question then is, what do you do with the person who can't be persuaded? And of course, what organizations should do is have worked that out years before, never have put the almost psychopathically high ego person in a leadership role in the first place. But sometimes, you know, if it is a perennial ego issue, then we are talking about replacing the leader, because it is a huge constraint on the ability to deliver not just the model, but the philosophy of this model.
When you speak of like the range of industry and sectors that you have worked with, and there's a lot, thinking about size of organizations,
Yeah,
does
great
this
question.
framework apply equally to small companies scaling up, growing, as opposed to really large companies?
So I think the framework does apply, but just in a different way. And I guess what I would say, and I've been asked this question a lot, and actually some of my clients are in exactly that world. They are founder-led organizations, you know, maybe in their third or fourth round of VC funding, looking for an event. How do I scale up? I have to tell you that need for clarity, because remember, this isn't just about strategic clarity when it's in a change context. This is strategic clarity of a new strategy, right? So an existing organization that might have been perennially successful They might not have a change framework on it because things might not be going badly, but they may well have a new strategy. Maybe they are entering a new geographical area of the world. Maybe they're trying to target a new customer segment. So wherever there is a new strategy, there is absolutely that need for clarity. It's the discipline of clarity that allows you to experiment and learn and to accelerate that experimentation and that learning. Equally, the organization, however small, needs to be aligned around the strategy that's been asked for. Now, the good news in a small organization is alignment is just not that hard because there are just not that many ducks to get in a row, right? So, switching from one budget or one P&L holder to another, I mean, the organization might not even have these things. It might just be very easy. The other thing that makes it much easier, particularly in founder-led and owned organizations, is that you typically have a majority shareholder who's still involved in the management. And so very often, I mean, it's a little bit almost like a dictatorship. The CEO, founder brackets and majority owner just kind of says, look, here's where we're going. Here's what we need to do. Make that happen. And so as long as those leaders are getting to the right level of clarity about why are we doing this and why now, what do we need, what will this deliver and by when, actually I can find that this is much easier and faster in a smaller company because there's just less complexity to drag to act as drag on the new strategy. What I would say though is that before you all fall in love with this framework, some of you might not need it. Some of you might, like, this might be a sledgehammer to crack a peanut. Like, you just don't need something that's as involved as this. I would always argue you need strategic clarity, but then once you've got that, you might not need alignment or focus or consistency. Clarity might be enough to get you there in a very small organization.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. When you look at the timeline for really delivering the change and allowing the time for it to take place, are there challenges that you've seen where leaders need to convince stakeholders or shareholders to stick with it, to allow the time to, and how do they get around that? If you're looking at 2 to 3 years, from clarity through consistency, that can be a long time.
Yep.
For boards or investors, particularly if the business is shrinking or something is going on with the company.
So how do you persuade them of that? Yeah. So this is a question I get asked a lot because a lot of my clients are very large quoted entities. In other words, they don't just have some shareholders; they've got really big institutional shareholders who've very much got a point of view about what the board should be doing and therefore the senior executive team. Here's what I always recommend. I always, and this goes back a little bit to that phrase, feed the beast. The beast here being institutional investors. They have a legitimate concern. They have given you their money and they want a return on it. And that is fair enough. And far too many large, complex organizations are under-delivering on shareholder return. So for me, this is one of the reasons that I am so militant in my advice to executive teams about the need for clarity and to link that clarity to the P&L. Because an awful lot of the time, in my experience in the past, leadership teams have gone off and kicked off a change project that is actually not sufficiently clearly linked to a margin improvement. In which case, why are you doing it? Like, your shareholders saying, can't you do that faster? Then becomes a very legitimate point of view. So that's the first thing, is actually that just, for me, says you need to be even more clear about why are we doing this and why now, and what will this deliver and by when, in essentially shareholder terms. The second thing I would say is that once you get into planning the change, so this is the world of actually having a Gantt chart and thinking, okay, here's the work stream that's going to deliver this bit of the P&L enhancement, the margin enhancement that we've promised, right? So what you're trying to do through that modeling, and that might be through a change program office or through the strategy office, it depends how your organization is set up. Basically, what you're trying to establish is that all of the activities of the change, the work streams, the project, when you press F9 on them, they will all roll up to deliver the margin enhancement that you've promised the street. So you actually need to do that work and really hold project teams' feet to the fire on, well, you said that I would be seeing, a 20 basis point improvement in margin by next January. It's only 10. What's going on? So I think that's the second thing. And then the third thing, so in other words, model it in some detail. Now, the only thing you know about that detail is it won't play out as you plan, so you need some cushion. But that's the nature of running any strategy function, which has got pressure from the top and pressure from the ground up. So it's making that negotiation work. The final thing I would always advise is that you do feed the beast. You do give the institutionals some I sometimes refer to this as kind of just a bit of chocolate sprinkles on the cake. So if we think of the change as the substantive change, the chocolate sprinkles are basically the things that deliver little fillips of return. They're short term, they're quick, they're what John Cotter calls quick wins. Now, for too many change programs, the quick wins have become the change program. So quick wins are not illegitimate if they are just the chocolate you sprinkle on top of the cake. But in other words, once you've scoped and resourced and delivered systemic change, improvement to customer data, improvement to how we understand the market, improvement to how quickly we get our new products out to market. Once you've delivered all of that kind of fundamental change, and you've got that in the plan. So there's kind of a real change component of the Gantt chart. And then there's a kind of chocolate sprinkles component of the Gantt chart. And on the course, there is literally a slide that talks about what's your real work that you are going to have to do to your business to make the change work. And then what are the chocolate sprinkles? And what I always suggest is you put them on an actual Gantt chart. I mean, I literally have a client who's got a chocolate sprinkle section in their change Gantt chart. And what they're doing with why it's on a Gantt chart is the timing of the release of those chocolate sprinkles to the market is very, very important and very potentially helpful, because basically it gives you cover. It lets you say to your institutionals, and I say this as a former sell-side equity analyst, it helps you say to people like me, as I used to be, look, we're doing some stuff. It's working. We've delivered a bit of improvement in margin. Trust us. It buys you cover, basically. But I mean, everyone in the world knows that the quick wins are not going to be the thing that delivers the actual change. That's far more fundamental and harder and going to take much longer. But yeah, I mean, equity analysts, institutional investors are human. They want to believe you, and having some proof points is a way to transmit that belief. But that's all it is. And so thinking about, as I say, the real work of the change, what needs to get resourced, what's the timing, how long is it going to take, what does the J curve look like? Mm-hmm. That's at the kind of level of the deep level of the Gantt chart. And then on top, you've got the chocolate sprinkles. And as I like to say to my class at MIT, if all you eat is chocolate, you're probably going to be undernourished. And it's exactly the same with your change program. It can give you a bit of a sugar rush, make you feel good, but it's not going to be enough to actually nourish the fundamental change that you want to make. And that's exactly how we should think about quick wins.
Well said. So Raquel is asking an interesting question. We've talked a lot about the leaders at the top, but let's look at the rest of the organization, the middle managers. How do they experience, this framework? How do they own the change underway?
Yeah.
And what is their role in executing the change agenda?
So this is a great question. And
managing
it's
up, managing down
it's a
in an
question that really
organization.
goes to the heart of not just the framework, but the philosophy behind the framework. Because what my research was really trying to understand was not just what enables some change to succeed, but also what enables the managers, the people tasked with delivering that change, in McCull's words, the middle managers of the organization, to be able just to get on with it, to own the change, to own the outcomes, and feel real autonomy in their ability to deliver those outcomes. So that's exactly what this model speaks to. So the way that we typically do this in organizations, and always how I would advise it, is leaders with positional power agree and clarify and then start articulating the answers to those clarity questions. Why are we doing this and why now? What will we deliver and by when? And very often that the level of analysis, the level at which they are answering that question is the top of the house, the enterprise level. So, for a quoted entity, it's the quoted company. Obviously, within that company, there are different countries, different business units, different product lines, different P&Ls, different functions. So what we need to do is we need to translate that higher enterprise level objective and narrative into, well, what does this mean for this business unit? What does this mean this P&L needs to deliver and by when? And so there is essentially the different business units, functions, levels of the organization will have their own answers to those questions. Now, the why do we need to do this and why now, that actually might be the same all the way down, all the way across the verticals. But the what does this mean we need to deliver? What does this mean my team needs to do or my P&L needs to contribute? Those will be different. And so the first thing is they will have their own version of that change narrative, and actually taking the time to translate the enterprise level change narrative into the vertical P&L or functional change narrative is, again, how I very often spend the first couple of months of engagement with a client. So that's the first thing. And then once you've got clarity about what these leaders lower down or in different parts of the organization, what they need to deliver, then you are much more likely to be able to get them to respond in a way that says, oh, actually, we shouldn't be working on this or investing in this. We should be working on this. This is our investment priority over here. Because again, they are closer to the local market, closer to the operations of the business or to customers. And so that's really when people start experiencing this thing that we call meaningful autonomy. So I've technically got autonomy, but now it's actually meaningful to me because I know what you want. And actually, I've got enough intel about my business and the customers to have my own point of view and own the outcomes of what we should be working on. So that really is how you do it. You cascade the clarity. So everyone's got their own version of the KPIs that they need to deliver. It's in their new job description. And then you hold them accountable. And as I say, the vast majority of organizations, as long as there is sufficient clarity from leaders at the top of the house, they're more than capable of doing the translation. And they're more than capable and willing to be held accountable for delivering on the KPIs that are in their part of the business. The vast majority of the time, in my experience with my clients, when people lower down, the middle managers say, well, I don't know what my KPIs should be. And do you know what? I'm not going to take accountability for delivering that. The vast majority of the time, that's because leaders have been insufficiently clear about why do we need to do this and what will we be delivering as a result. So yeah, it all comes back to clarity.
So maybe like kind of a follow-up point here, when we're talking about implementing strategic change, cracking like the organization's culture must be important. And how much time or effort, might you spend, working with your clients to understand that and to integrate that piece of it?
Yeah. So we have a philosophy, which is that you think of culture kind of at the end. And the reason, and so the sequence of thinking is strategy first, getting clarity on the strategy, right? That's clarity. Then structural change to align the organization around the change you've asked for or the new strategy. Then you need to look and say, well, where are my capabilities? Have I got the right people on the bus? Have they got the right skills? Because when we go into organizations and we say, why haven't you delivered this strategy? There's basically a sequence of answers that people come back with. One was, I didn't know what the strategy was. It wasn't clear enough. Okay, well, that's on leaders. Leaders need to, get better, get clearer, spend more time explaining and evangelizing and re-explaining the change. So, okay, but even when people say, yeah, I knew what the strategy was, but you know what? We were just not set up to do this. I didn't have the budget. The org chart was crazy. There was no accountability. Okay, well, that's again on leaders, because leaders have positional power and can reorg the organization to help them deliver the new strategy that they've asked for. But even then, when we go into organizations, even in places where people say, yep, you know what, I knew what the strategy was and it had been cascaded down. I knew what I was on the hook for. And there'd been a reorg and I kind of had the budget that I needed. But there are kind of these two residual issues of, but you know what, we're just not set up to do that. We don't have that capability. Okay, well, that's a capability gap. And that means you need to get either different people on the bus, or you need to train and develop the people who are on the bus to have the capabilities that the new strategy needs. That's a capability gap. But then there's this fourth gap, and we call it the culture gap, which is, yep, knew what the strategy was, had it cascaded down, I knew what I was on the hook for. Yep, the organization had been reorged, I had the budget and kind of aligned around the strategy. And I even had the capability, but the culture around here doesn't reward me from exercising those capabilities. Okay, so that is the culture gap. Now, the reason we leave it till last is two things. One, it's actually really hard. And so better getting on with some of the other stuff that you can do. I mean, getting strategic clarity isn't intellectually easy, but you can do it, right? You just need to be smart and apply yourself. But the other reason we leave it till last is actually the process of going through and closing those first three gaps, the clarity gap, the structural gap of aligning the organization around the change you've asked for or the new strategy, and the capability building gap will telegraph to people, it'll signal to people that actually, you know what, the culture's changing as well, that this is the change that leaders want. This is the direction of travel. Things need to change around here. And our experience is that a lot of what looked like a cultural problem basically kind of goes away in the process of leaders getting strategic clarity and going on the road and explaining it and evangelizing for it. Aligning the business. Now, remember what that means. That means reallocating budget, reallocating people. If people are looking up from their desk and going, wow, I've just seen that they've closed that project down and they've given all of those smart people to this new project over here. Wow, that's a signal. That tells me this new project over here is really the priority. So alignment is also a way of achieving a cultural shift. And then if all of a sudden money and time is being devoted to building new capabilities, maybe to making you more customer focused, maybe to bringing in a different way of looking at the market, or again, that the process of building capability and the investment of time and budget in the building of that capability, that's also signaling things are changing around here. There's a different direction of travel. And so very often what we find is not all, but some of the cultural work that we thought we'd need to do, some of it's actually been done almost as a byproduct of closing first the clarity, then the structural, and then the capability gap. Now, there will be residual cultural work to do. We know how to do that. You understand the current culture. You then think about what culture do I need to really affect this new strategy? And how do I map from where I am to where I need to be? And actually, one of the exercises that we'll have folks do on this new course is an exercise that answers exactly this question, which is, how does my culture need to change? And what are the mechanisms, are really concrete, practical ways, things like the stories that we tell in the organization, or the controls that we use, or the rituals and routines that we have habitually in the organization. These are really the ways that the culture of a place manifests to ordinary people. And again, back to Rachel's question, at people all the way down at different levels of the organization. So what new stories might you need to tell that are different from the old stories? What new controls or rituals might you need to introduce to deal with whatever residual cultural problem you have? It's a great question. As I say, very often we find that some of the cultural gap has been closed by the time we get there, but it does need to be addressed to the extent there's a residual gap.
Well, thank you. And I can't believe that we're at time here. I knew that the 60 minutes was going to fly by. Thank you so much, Elsbeth, for taking the time, for giving the highlights of the framework in your book, Step Up, Step Back, for talking a bit about our new course. And again, that is next June on the MIT campus, the 5th through the 9th. And the title is Leading Strategic Change, How to Really Deliver the Shift Your Organization Needs, based on Elsbeth's research and field experience. I can't wait to welcome you back to campus.
Thank you, Mike. Absolute pleasure to spend time with you and the audience today. And yeah, we're hoping to see as many of you as possible at MIT on June the 5th.
And we did not get to all of the questions, but we will create a blog post as a follow-up. Yeah. So look for that, as well as the link to our discussion today. But thank you, everybody, for joining for our ongoing series in the first of 2023. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year. And thank you for all your excellent questions.
Thanks, everyone.